Have you ever heard of a place where humans were no longer considered humans? A place where screams were heard every night, but no one dared to approach. This is Unit 731, a secret Japanese facility that pretended to be a medical center but was actually a death factory. Behind those barbed wire fences, humans were called by one name, Maruta. Not humans, not prisoners of war, just logs to be cut, burned, and used for experiments. And from here, one of the darkest stories in the history of World War II begins. In 1932, Japan established a puppet state named Manchukuo following the invasion of Manchuria. The empire needed a strong military base in northeast China. That was when the name Shiro Ishii appeared, a young doctor who was ambitious, brilliant, yet thirsty for power. Ishii had a dangerous idea. Japan must master biological weapons. Weapons that are invisible, inaudible, but can wipe out thousands of people. In a military meeting, Ishii said with a calm but confident voice, "Imagine, Your Majesty, we do not need to send thousands of soldiers to conquer a city. Just send bacteria, just spread a plague. The enemy will be paralyzed without resistance." The generals fell silent, looking at each other. What he proposed sounded crazy, but in the midst of war ambitions, crazy ideas are often considered genius. Emperor Hirohito gave his blessing. So, Unit 731 was established in Harbin, officially called the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Unit, a name that sounded peace. But behind that name, hell was hidden. Every day, military trucks entered the complex gates. Inside were prisoners, with their eyes bound, hands tied. There were grown men, women, and even children. Japanese soldiers called them Maruta. In the barracks, young Japanese doctors wrote reports while drinking hot tea. Some of them even joked. They knew what they would do that day, dissecting humans alive, testing weapons, infecting diseases. For them, this was not a crime. This was research. In contrast, prisoners were locked in narrow cells without sunlight, fed only meagerly. Every time the cell door opened, their bodies trembled because those who were taken out never returned. One night, a Chinese teenager named Li Wai, 17 years old, was arrested on the street on suspicion of being a guerrilla sympathizer. He was thrown into a truck, taken inside the complex. Inside the cell, he met other prisoners who whispered, "Do you know where we have been taken?" Li shook his head. "To a place where people are called Maruta. You will find out yourself." That night, Li heard a long scream from the next room, the scream of a woman, then the sound of metal clanking, then silence. He tried to cover his ears, but the sound still entered his dreams. Shiro Ishii himself rarely got his hands dirty. He more often gave orders, compiled reports, lobbied the government. However, he always ensured the experiments ran scientifically. Every detail was recorded: room temperature, duration of infection, the victim's body reaction. He often walked down the laboratory corridors with his hands behind his back, his sharp eyes observing. If a young doctor hesitated, he would say coldly, "Don't look at them as humans. Look at them as data. Firewood has no name." Those words pierced the conscience of the young staff, slowly killing it. The Unit 731 complex was not just a laboratory. There were operating rooms, high-pressure chambers, cooling rooms, experiment cells, and even a crematorium. The smell of burning flesh was often smelled in the air. A Japanese soldier years later admitted, "When I stood guard outside, I often smelled a strange odor, a smell like roasting pork, but more rotten. I knew it wasn't pork." In the long hallways, neon lights flickered. From behind steel doors, coughing, screaming, and then the sound of hammers were heard. The doctors worked like mechanics in a garage. The difference was, the machines they dismantled were human bodies, That was how Unit 731 began. A place that pretended to be a medical center, but was truly a factory of death. And inside it, thousands of humans turned into numbers. However, this was just the beginning of the terrifying experiments. The stories of victims and the greatest betrayal in history still wait behind the iron doors of Unit 731. That morning, the ringing of a metal bell echoed throughout the Unit 731 complex. The prisoners were woken up. The sound of soldiers' boots hitting the concrete floor. Iron doors were opened roughly. In one of the cells where Lee was held, he was pulled out, his hands tied. He tried to resist, but a rifle butt struck his stomach. That long corridor smelled pungent, a mixture of carbolic acid, dried blood, and something more rotten. Lee Wai was herded into the operating room. A white hanging lamp shone brightly, almost blinding. In the center of the room was a metal table. Around it stood Japanese doctors in clean white coats. A young doctor whispered to his colleague, "Patient 23. Male subject, age 17, healthy condition." Patient, subject. That was what they were called. Not humans. Lee Wai was forced to lie down. Leather straps held his wrists and ankles. He screamed hysterically, "Help! I am not a criminal." An old doctor stood at the end of the room, staring coldly. "Silence him." A soldier immediately stuffed Lee Wai's mouth with a dirty cloth. The scalpel came down slowly, without anesthesia injection, without sedatives. Lee Wai's abdominal skin was sliced. Fresh blood flowed. Screams were stifled behind the gag cloth. His hands shook wildly, but the straps held strong. The doctors recorded the reaction. Heart rate, amount of blood loss per minute, nerve response when cut. For them, this was science. For Lee, this was hell. That morning, the ringing of a metal bell echoed throughout the Unit 731 complex. The prisoners were woken up. The sound of soldiers' boots hitting the concrete floor. Iron doors were opened roughly. In one of the cells where Lee was held, he was pulled out, his hands tied. He tried to resist, but a rifle butt struck his stomach. That long corridor smelled pungent, a mixture of carbolic acid, dried blood, and something more rotten. Lee Wai was herded into the operating room. A white hanging lamp shone brightly, almost blinding. In the center of the room was a metal table. Around it stood Japanese doctors in clean white coats. A young doctor whispered to his colleague, "Patient 23. Male subject, age 17, healthy condition." Patient, subject. That was what they were called. Not humans. Lee Wai was forced to lie down. Leather straps held his wrists and ankles. He screamed hysterically, "Help! I am not a criminal." An old doctor stood at the end of the room, staring coldly. "Silence him." A soldier immediately stuffed Lee Wai's mouth with a dirty cloth. The scalpel came down slowly, without anesthesia injection, without sedatives. Lee Wai's abdominal skin was sliced. Fresh blood flowed. Screams were stifled behind the gag cloth. His hands shook wildly, but the straps held strong. The doctors recorded the reaction, heart rate, amount of blood loss per minute, nerve response when cut. For them, this was science. For Lee, this was hell. On the other side of the complex, another experiment was taking place. Unit 731 was famous for frostbite tests. How the human body handles extreme cold. The victim this time was a young woman named Malin. She was taken to an open yard. The air was -20 degrees. Her hands were forced into ice water, then left exposed to the Siberian wind. A doctor took notes while smoking a cigarette. "We wait until we hear the sound of wood." What did that mean? The The sound when skin and muscles freeze hard like a log. Mylan shivered violently. Her lips turned blue. After 1 hour, her hands froze. Her skin was white like wax. The doctor then hit her arm with a wooden stick. Crack. The sound was like a board breaking perfectly. "Perfect," mumbled the doctor. "Now we try to thaw it." They poured boiling hot water directly onto her frozen arms. The skin peeled. The flesh peeled. The smell of burning mixed with cold steam. Mylan screamed with all her might, until her voice was hoarse. All of that was recorded in detail in the experiment report. Some young doctors still harbored guilt. One of them, Dr. Tanaka, whispered to his colleague after the experiment, "Is this really for Japan?" His colleague answered flatly, "This is for science and for the emperor." "But they are still humans?" "No. They are Maruta. Logs. They don't feel pain." Tanaka looked down, but he kept recording the experiment results. His hands trembled. Years later, a former guard recounted, "I can still hear that sound. The screams when their stomachs were opened. The smell when frozen flesh was thawed. I have nightmares every night, but at that time, we were ordered not to see them as humans." The corridors of Unit 731 were like a labyrinth. Neon lights flickering, wall paint peeling, and on every door, there was a number code. The prisoners were brought in one by one, and came out in the form of body bags or went straight to the crematorium. Black smoke from the chimney kept rising. The residents of Harbin saw it every day but pretended not to know, because anyone who asked too many questions could also disappear. Vivisection experiments without anesthesia, cruel frostbite tests. All of that was just a small part of Unit 731's catalog of hell. Thousands of humans were made into objects, while the doctors wrote reports as if they were researching laboratory animals. And the further we go in, the darker the story gets. Biological weapon experiments, bombs containing diseases, to whole villages being used as guinea pigs. Unit 731 was not just a laboratory, but also the largest biological weapons factory in the world at its time. In one large hangar, rows of steel drums containing anthrax, bacteria, plague, cholera, and dysentery were arranged neatly. In the corner of the room, scientists in white uniforms recorded storage temperatures, ensuring the bacterial colonies stayed alive. Outside, Japanese planes were waiting. An officer gave strict instructions. Tomorrow morning, the village on the outskirts of Harbin will be the target of the test. Ensure the bomb load is full. That bomb was no ordinary bomb. Its content was not explosives, but a microscopic curse. Fleas infected with plague, wheat grains mixed with cholera, liquid full of bacteria ready to be dropped from the air. The next morning, a Japanese plane flew low over a small village. The residents looked up at the sky, confused to see strange objects being dropped. They thought it was food or aid. It turned out to be ceramic bombs containing fleas infected with plague. Thousands of small insects spread, landing on the ground, clothes, even biting the residents' skin. On the first day, children started to have fevers. On the second day, their bodies swelled. Black boils appeared in their armpits and necks. On the third day, the village turned into a living graveyard. Screams were heard from every house. A mother screamed while hugging her baby who had a high fever. "Help! Help! Stop this! What is happening to my child?" No one came to help. From a distance, Japanese soldiers just took notes, took photos, wrote reports. At the Unit 731 headquarters, the doctors gathered. Subjects in Village 34 died within 3 days on average. The effect of the plague is faster than cholera, very effective for mass spreading. Good. If released into a big city, we can wipe out tens of thousands of people without firing a single bullet. A young doctor asked softly, "But they are civilians." Children, women, elderly. A senior doctor stared sharply, answering coldly. They are not humans. They are test tools. Japan needs this to win the war. Not only villages, even open fields were sometimes filled with prisoners who were deliberately released. The scientists placed small biological bombs in the middle of them, then stood far away while taking notes. A small explosion, dust mixed with bacteria spread. The prisoners coughed, choked, then fell one by one. Within days, they were dying, vomiting blood, skin blistering, stomach swelling. In the experiment notes, it was written coldly. Subject 12 died within 36 hours. Respiratory failure. Subject 18 died within 48 hours. Internal bleeding. Subject 21 still alive, 72 hours, severe condition. Human lives were just numbers on paper. Years later, a former Japanese pilot testified, "I was the one who dropped those ceramic bombs. I still remember the faces of the children running, looking up at the sky. They thought it was food. When I returned to base, I was given praise. But since that night, I cannot sleep. In my dreams, I see those children turning into corpses. My own hands dropped the curse." The residents of Harbin began to get suspicious. They often saw crematorium smoke rising thicker than usual. Sometimes there was a rotten smell carried by the wind, mixed with the smell of gunpowder. People whispered, "There is something behind those walls. I saw a train full of people entering there, but never coming out." However, fear shut their mouths. Unit 731 was a most guarded secret. Anyone who spoke too much could also disappear. The biological experiments of Unit 731 were invisible terror, not just bullets and cannons, but plagues deliberately created by humans to kill other humans. And for Japan, at that time, this was just the beginning. They planned to spread diseases to big cities like Shanghai. There was even a plan to drop the plague on the United States. But before that happened, the world discovered this secret hell first. In 1945, the world shook. America dropped bombs on Japanese cities, and from the north, the Red Army moved fast towards Manchuria. In the Unit 731 complex, panic struck. Doctors, officers, guards were busy destroying evidence. Piles of documents were burned, laboratories were blown up, and the prisoners, thousands of innocent humans, were finished off cruelly. The prison corridors were filled with screams. The prisoners were herded outdoors. No trial, no reason, just the blast of rifles again and again. A young soldier trembled, refusing to shoot a small child. He is still a kid, sir." An officer pushed his head towards the muzzle of the rifle. "Don't waste time. Do you want to die with them?" Bang. The small body fell on top of a pile of other corpses. Even in the final days, some scientists were still conducting express experiments. Prisoners were locked in airtight rooms, then poison gas was released. They scratched their necks, coughed blood, collapsed one by one. In another room, dozens of people were injected with different viruses. Notes were written quickly as if human lives were just numbers. Subject A died within 6 hours. Subject B died within 12 hours. Subject C still surviving. Critical condition. Meanwhile, outside the walls, the sound of Soviet cannons got closer. As thousands of prisoners died, the doctors and commanders of Unit 731 boarded a special train. They carried suitcases full of experiment documents, results of years of torture, heading to Japan. A low-ranking Japanese soldier who was left behind testified, "We were ordered to bury as many corpses as possible. The smell of rotting flesh filled the air. While the doctors escaped with calm faces, they left, and we were left with hell." A few days later, the Red Army entered Harbin. What they found was not a military base, but a slaughterhouse for humans. Trenches full of lifeless bodies, room walls stained with blood, glass jars containing preserved human organs. A Soviet soldier covered his nose, face pale. "Why? What did they do here?" His commander answered briefly. "This is not war. This is scientific massacre." Ironically, most of the Unit 731 scientists were never tried. Many of them handed over their experiment results to America, and in exchange, they were allowed to live freely. Doctors who should have been hanged in a war tribunal instead taught at universities, opened clinics, lived normal lives, while thousands of victims without names, without graves, disappeared just like that from history records. Today, the remains of the Unit 731 building stand as a museum in Harbin. However, many residents believe the land still holds the screams of those who died there. Some visitors claim to smell a strange odor like burning flesh. Others hear the sound of chains being dragged in the empty hallways, as if the spirits of the victims are still waiting, demanding justice that never came. That is the story of Unit 731, the darkest side of World War II. In this place, humans were used as test materials. There was no glory of war, no soldier's honor, only suffering, blood, and screams that never received justice. Until today, those shadows are still felt. The soil of Harbin still holds secrets, and the victims remain in silence, as if waiting for someone to remember them. It is terrifying to realize that such cruelty was inflicted in the name of science. What are your thoughts on the tragedies of Unit 731 and the immunity granted to its scientists? Let me know your opinions in the comments below. And if you have any requests for other dark history stories, mysteries, or true crime cases you'd like me to cover, feel free to leave a comment. See you in the next story.